But first, Attorney General Pam Bondi started her first day with a bang, issuing a variety of orders, some of which make good sense, like an October 7th task force to, quote, prioritize seeking justice for victims of the October 7th terrorist attack in Israel, addressing the ongoing threat posed by Hamas and its affiliates, combating anti-Semitic acts of terrorism and civil rights violations. She also issued an order reinstating the federal death penalty and others which are entirely consistent with President Trump's priorities, like directing more resources to combating illegal immigration, ending DEI programs, and resuming a battle with various so-called sanctuary cities. All initiatives that should hardly be surprising from any attorney general for President Trump. But the ones that trouble me relate to creating a so-called weaponization working group to investigate former special counsel Jack Smith, who brought the federal criminal cases against Trump, both over his role in January 6th, another on the obstruction of justice in connection with the mishandling of the classified documents. She directed the group also to examine federal cooperation with the weaponization in connection with the criminal hush money case brought by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg and the civil fraud lawsuit against Trump and his family business brought by Attorney General Letitia James of New York. That resulted in a judge ordering Trump to pay a huge civil judgment. But before I go on, let me say, I was very much opposed to the case brought by Alvin Bragg, and I was supportive of Pam Bondi as the choice for AG, despite a lot of whining from the left. I've known her for years. But rather than trying to accomplish the new president's policy goals, which is expected, this feels like another effort to whine again about supposed weaponization that just is not backed up by the facts. I've discussed this many times on this show about the reality that by our count, there were 11 major Republicans nationwide who were either publicly investigated or indicted by the Biden DOJ, and during the same span, there were 12 major Democrats across the country, same thing, investigated or indicted by the feds. And those Democrats also crying politicization of the DOJ. It's even when it doesn't make any sense. Most recently from convicted former Senator Bob Menendez, who was sentenced to 11 years after being convicted on 18 counts, corruption-related offenses. After his sentence was handed down, he said this.
This whole process has been nothing but a political witch hunt by the Justice Department's NSD and prosecutors.
And he isn't the only Democrat to claim the Biden DOJ was weaponized against them. Former Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, Democrat, convicted last year on multiple perjury charges relating to a false mortgage application. She claimed the Biden DOJ targeted her because she too aggressively fought for racial justice.
I have done things as a prosecutor that a lot of other prosecutors have not done in this country, whether that is holding police accountable when a lot of other prosecutors in this country would not do so, whether that is ending the war on drugs, which we know was a war on black people in the city of Baltimore. I've gotten lawsuits, OIG investigations, state ethics investigations.
It was all about the Biden DOJ's racism. It's always something with these political leaders. They're always the victims. It's of racism or politics or anything but the actual crime or issue being investigated or charged. T.J. Cox, former Democratic congressman from California, charged in 2022 28 counts related to wire fraud, money laundering. He claimed he was a victim of political prosecution. This week, he accepted a plea deal where he pled guilty to 2 of those counts. Faces a lot of time in prison when he's sentenced in June. Probably won't get that much time, but even Hunter Biden's lawyer argued his prosecution was political. Hunter Biden was a victim of, quote, selective prosecution because he was, quote, politically affiliated with his father as sitting president and a candidate for re-election. Former Missouri Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush, who was investigated for alleged misuse of campaign funds, argued the investigation against her by the Biden DOJ was being powered by mysterious right-wing forces.
I am under no illusion that these right-wing organizations will stop politicizing and pursuing efforts to attack me.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams, same song, indicted in September. Those 5 charges, fraud, soliciting illegal foreign campaign donations. That's what he said.
I always knew that if I stood my ground for all of you, that I would be a target. And a target I became.
One after the other, they blame the system, they claim it's politics, it's not evidence, it's not actions, it's not inaction. And as I've pointed out previously, every single FBI director has been a Republican. One became an independent. Former Director Chris Wray, appointed by President Trump at a Senate hearing in 2023, pointed out that as a, quote, lifelong Republican, the idea that he was leading a politicized FBI, quote, made no sense. And in another hearing, he pointed out that when it comes to prosecuting those disrupting abortion clinics, which is often cited to prove so-called weaponization, that actually more of their investigations were actually on the other side.
Now, we have quite a number of investigations as we speak into attacks or threats against pregnancy resource centers, faith-based organizations, and other pro-life organizations. And you might be interested to know that since the Dobbs Act decision, probably in the neighborhood of 70% of our abortion-related violence cases or threats cases are cases of violence or threats against pro-life, so where the victims are pro-life organizations.
But that doesn't fit with the narrative. And yet now Kash Patel, the president's nominee to run the FBI, looks likely to be confirmed, though Democrats today successfully delayed a vote to advance his nomination out of the Senate Judiciary Committee by a week. He's identifying fighting weaponization as a primary qualification for the job.
This may be one of the scenarios that most uniquely qualifies me to take command at the FBI. Having been the victim of government overreach and a weaponized system of justice and law enforcement, I know what it feels like to have the full weight of the United States government barreling down on you.
And Attorney General Bondi wants them looking back at the January 6th cases, right? The argument always seems to be that many or most of the defendants got the book thrown at them compared to other cases, particularly compared to the 2020 protesters in the wake of the death of George Floyd. Now remember, there were tens of thousands of people protesting that day. I think it's something like 120,000 total. 1,600 of them got criminally charged. Only those who went inside the Capitol building or attacked officers. There were thousands more who went into the restricted perimeter on the Capitol grounds, technically committing a crime when the fencing and barricades around it were breached, but they were not prosecuted. As for the summer of 2020 rioters, it was Trump's AG, Bill Barr, who led the federal prosecutions. Thousands were arrested, and yes, some had charges dropped based on lack of evidence, or in certain cases, maybe they shouldn't have been dropped. But an Associated Press comparison of charges against January 6 protesters and BLM rioters published in June of 2021 found in more than 300 federal cases stemming from the protests sparked by George Floyd's death, dozens of people charged have been convicted of serious crimes and sent to prison. And, quote, more than 120 defendants across the United States have pleaded guilty or were convicted at trial of federal crimes, including rioting, arson, and conspiracy. Quote, more than 70 defendants got an average of about 2 years and 3 months behind bars. 10 received terms of 5 years or more. That was just the middle of 2021. At least 1,284 felony cases were brought as a result of those riots. Again, with some getting serious prison time. So I'm just not sure how the claim of weaponization holds up, and yet it just continues to be a major focus of this Congress. And now the DOJ, which isn't just a shame, it's just not supported by the facts, and it feels like an attack on law enforcement. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen, and don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.